The snow had a sound to it, not the kind you hear, the kind that fills the inside of your skull like ash, a soft, choking hush that settles in your ears and bones until you forget what warmth used to feel like. Maribel Horn didn't know how many hours she'd been walking, only that the snow was past her knees, and her baby was no longer in her arms. Her arms were empty. So was everything else. The forest didn't speak. No birds, no wolves. Just the crunch of her worn boots, the rasp of her breath, and the memory of screaming. Hers, the baby's, or both. It had been loud once. Now the world was only the color of milk and sky and her own pain. The baby's shawl was clutched in her fist, blue wool, a tiny bit of blood on one corner. She didn't look at it. She didn't say her name, not even in her head. Maribel's legs buckled at the top of a slope. She caught herself on the crook of a pine root, half buried in frost, and blinked against the sting of snowflakes trying to freeze her eyelashes shut. She wanted to lie down. The thought came like a stranger's voice, soft, friendly. Just lie here. It'll be quiet. It'll be like sleep. But then the wind shifted, and she smelled smoke. Not the choking kind from the commune's fires, not the acrid, holy judgment kind they used when purging sin. This was hearth smoke, pine, steady, close. Her hand closed tighter on the shawl. She staggered forward. The cabin looked abandoned, a squat thing with a half-buried roof and snow so thick on the windows, it was like nature itself wanted to hide it. But there was smoke, and, dear God, light. Maribel fell against the door, weakly pounded once with the side of her fist, and then collapsed to her knees. She didn't hear the man come out, but she felt him, a shadow, a presence, towering, mute, then a scoop under her shoulders, strong arms, smell of iron and soot. Her head lolled against a chest that was warm like the inside of a kiln, and the last thing she felt before slipping into blackness was the soft rasp of a wool blanket against her cheek, and the sound of the door closing behind them. Elias Ward didn't speak much anymore. Hadn't had to. Not since his last horse died 2 winters back. No one came up this far unless they had a death wish or nothing left to lose. He'd seen her silhouette through the frost-glassed window, thought she might be a ghost. Or worse, a trap. There were bandits who used women like bait, even in the mountains. But this one? No coat, no horse. A baby shawl in her hand, but no baby. Half dead, shaking, soaked through with blood and meltwater. He knew that kind of look. Not bait, not danger, just broken. He didn't speak to her that night, just stoked the fire high and laid her on the cot near the hearth. He peeled off the wet clothes as gently as he could, paused when he saw the bruising on her ribs. Too many to count. Purple and green, some healing, some fresh. He muttered something under his breath. Not a prayer, not a curse, just a sound, rough and guttural, as he threw a quilt over her and sat down in the rocker with his hammer still at his side. He stayed awake until morning. Maribel woke in stages. First the warmth, then the crackle, then the taste of broth on her tongue. Someone was spooning it into her mouth, careful, silent. She tried to move. Her fingers twitched. Her lip cracked. The man, just a shape at first, lowered the spoon and leaned back. "Fire'll stay on," he said. Just 3 words. Gravelly, tired, patient, then silence again. She slept through the next day and the one after. The 3rd day, she sat up. The blanket was still around her. The man was still there, mending something by the fire. He didn't look at her, just nodded once. There was tea and bread, and the shawl folded neatly beside the stove. She didn't ask his name. She didn't speak at all. But she didn't need to. The cabin was a blacksmith's cabin. Tools everywhere, old ones. Clean, polished, not much use anymore. Forged long cold, but kept like they still mattered. Maribel found herself staring at a horseshoe on the wall. It had a dent in the curve. She wondered what had done that. On the 5th day, Elias brought in a bundle of firewood and said, "Snow's deep. Don't go out." She didn't reply. She just pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and stared at the fire. He didn't push. He just stirred the coals and added more wood. The days passed like that, quiet, software. The fire never went out, not once. She started sitting closer to it. She began to eat more. She braided her hair one morning and wept afterward without making a sound. Elias never asked about the baby, not because he didn't care, because he could see it in her every movement. The way she held the shawl like it was still warm, the way her eyes flicked to the door whenever the wind howled, the way she sometimes woke, gasping, and pressed both hands to her stomach like she'd been cut there. He didn't touch her, didn't ask, didn't judge. He just added more wood to the fire and waited. That night, she whispered, just one word. Why? Elias didn't pretend not to hear. Because I've seen cold like that before, he said. Then he leaned back in the chair, folded his hands over his stomach, and closed his eyes. Maribel sat awake all night, watching the fire, listening to the soft creak of the rocking chair, and for the first time since the baby was taken, she didn't feel cold. There was a coat hanging by the door, canvas, heavy, lined in sheepskin, too big for her by twice, but she'd been eyeing it for days. Elias caught her staring at it once. He didn't say a word, just turned back to the stew pot and gave it a slow stir, like he hadn't noticed. But the next morning, the coat was draped neatly over the rocker, not the wall hook. She put it on and stepped outside. The air snapped against her face, bitter and bright. It was midwinter still, deep in it, but the sky had cleared to that sharp kind of blue that feels colder than snow. A pale sun watched her from above the trees. No roads, no fences, just the silence of pine and drift, and the barely there trail where Elias had been bringing wood down from the hills. She stood still for a long time, let her breath fog and vanish. And when she turned to go back inside, she realized something strange. Her footprints didn't look like a woman's anymore, not the woman she used to be. These steps looked stronger, more like someone returning than fleeing. Elias didn't ask where she'd gone. He just nodded toward the hearth and said, "Tea's warm." She sat, drank, didn't speak, but her eyes didn't look like glass anymore. And when she caught him watching her hands, how they trembled when she took off the coat, she didn't flinch. She just pulled the blanket tighter, and he looked away. That night, she heard him in his sleep. Not words, not quite. Just a low sound, like someone holding a name in their mouth, but too afraid to say it. She lay on her side, one eye open, watching the coals in the stove glow faint red in the dark. She wondered what had brought him up here, what he'd left behind, and whether the fire had saved him too. They found a rhythm, not speaking, not needing to. She cleaned the floor one morning, then the counters, then the rust from the hinges of the old tool chest near the back wall. Elias didn't stop her, didn't thank her, but that night, he brought in a sack of flour from the storage shed and set it on the table without a word. She baked cornbread. He didn't say it was good, but he cut himself a second piece. That was enough. The snow eased, not melted, but softened. Birds came back, not many, just a few black specks in the trees that didn't sing, just watched, like they knew what had happened here, like they were waiting too. Maribel asked her first full question the day she found the map. It was drawn on thick parchment, folded under a drawer in the cabinet, faint, with hand-sketched mountains and a red mark far to the south. She brought it to Elias. "What's here?" she asked, pointing. He looked at it for a long time. "Trouble," he said at last. Then, more softly, "You came from there." She nodded. He folded the map shut. Didn't ask anything else. But that night, when she came back from fetching water, there was a second coat hanging by the door. Hers now. The baby shawl was tucked in its pocket. The fire stayed lit, day and night. She learned how to stoke it just right, how to bank the embers with ash, how to read the pop and hiss like a kind of language. She started sitting close to it at night, knees hugged to her chest, hair falling in soft ropes over her shoulders. Elias would work behind her, sharpening tools, boiling glue, carving wood. One night, he brought out a small box, set it on the table. "Yours," he said. She opened it. Inside, needles, thread, scissors, bits of fabric folded like old paper. She reached out with a shaking hand, touched one of the squares. It was the same blue as the baby's shawl. Her voice broke when she spoke. I used to sew. He didn't look at her. Then you still can, he said. Later, she found herself standing in front of the cabin mirror, not because of vanity, just to see if she was still there. The reflection startled her. She didn't look like the girl who'd arrived bloody and barefoot. She looked like someone who had learned how to hold still without shattering. Someone whose silence wasn't fear anymore, but choice. Spring was coming. You could feel it in the dirt. Elias handed her a spade one morning. Still soft down by the creek, he said. They cleared a plot together, broke earth, turned soil. Her hands blistered. He gave her gloves, worn ones, soft at the palms. She planted cabbage, he built a fence. Neither said a word about why, but both of them knew. You don't plant unless you believe the world might last. A month passed, then another. She began humming again, quietly, absently, when peeling potatoes or brushing ash from the hearth. Not lullabies, not hymns, just small notes, fragments of herself, stitched back in without her realizing. Elias heard it, didn't mention it, but when he went to the woodshed, he came back with wood for carving. He gave her the finished piece 2 days later, set it on the table. It was a cradle, small, plain, strong, the kind you'd never find in a commune, the kind you'd build when you believe a child deserved more than sorrow. She couldn't speak. Her fingers trembled when she touched it, and then very softly, she said her baby's name aloud for the first time. Josie. The fire snapped once, then settled. Elias didn't say anything. He just picked up another log and placed it on the coals. Slow, steady, like it could burn forever if someone kept feeding it. The first sign came with the crows. Not one, not two, but a dozen, black as old blood, lining the rail above the woodshed, silent, still. Elias saw them and stilled too. They weren't local birds, and they weren't here for scraps. That evening, Maribel came inside with her arms full of kindling and a cold look in her eyes. There's a boot print by the lower fence, she said. Elias stood, just stood, didn't say a word, didn't grab a rifle, didn't ask her if she was sure. She was. That night, the fire was built higher than usual, not for heat, for smoke. Thick columns rising into the forest canopy, drifting high enough to send a signal without raising alarm. You had to know what it meant to read it. It meant not abandoned. It meant not alone. She didn't ask how he knew what to do, didn't ask what he'd done before this cabin, but she noticed he sharpened the axe that night, twice, and moved a few things under the floorboards. When the first one came, it wasn't with horses or gunshots or threats. It was with a bell, rung once in the trees, a quiet metal chime. She dropped the ladle in the stew pot, froze. Elias moved to the door and opened it slowly. A man stood at the tree line, grinning, empty-handed, but behind that grin was the kind of hunger that didn't need food. Well, the man said, didn't expect to see you again. He wasn't talking to Elias. Maribel didn't speak, didn't move, but she was already reaching for the poker by the hearth. Elias stepped between her and the man like he'd done it 1,000 times before. You're 2 weeks late, he said. The man laughed. You always were dramatic. You think a few months in the woods changed what she owes? Elias didn't blink. She doesn't owe. The man's face dropped. Just a hair. Just long enough for Maribel to see what was underneath. Rage. Not heat, not violence. Just a cold, patient rage. You don't get to decide that, the man said. Elias didn't reply. He just stepped back, shut the door, and bolted it. Then turned to Maribel. We don't run, he said. She nodded. I know. She sat on the edge of the bed that night, holding the baby shawl. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes didn't blur. But the silence inside her, the one they'd built up like a wall, had cracks now. I know who he is, she said. He used to be kind. Elias didn't ask her to explain. Didn't ask what the man had done or what he wanted. He just asked, Where's the baby? She swallowed. South Ridge, unmarked grave, wrapped in linen. I named her Josie. Elias didn't look away. He didn't flinch. He just nodded and stood, walked to the hearth, and added another log to the fire. Then he sat down, between her and the door. The next 2 days were quiet, too quiet. No crows, no bells, no signs of return, which was worse than noise, because silence out here meant planning. Elias carved during the day, reinforced the window latches, moved the food into sacks for faster packing. Maribel did not cry. She did not panic. She hemmed the baby shawl, smaller, neater, into a pouch. She stitched her daughter's name inside it. On the third night, they lit no fire. Let the coals go cold. Watched from the loft window as 4 shapes moved through the trees. Not fast, not loud, just steady, like they already believed the cabin belonged to them. Maribel said nothing, but she remembered the dark room, the shouts, the command to lie still, the silent nods of the others who hadn't helped. They had said it was punishment. They had said it was God's way. But God hadn't come. Only snow, only blood, and then Elias. The intruders came at dawn. No warning, just wood splitting at the back, boots hitting the floor, and hands reaching in. Maribel didn't scream. She moved. Fast. Hot water thrown into one man's face. A shelf knocked loose to block the hall. Elias took down the first one with a single blow from the carving mallet. No flourish, no rage, just precision. Like he'd done it before. But the last man, the one with the bell, got through. He stood in the doorway, knife in hand, grinning again. I told them you'd come back soft, he said to Maribel. I told them you'd forget what you were. Elias stepped between them, but Maribel raised a hand. No. Her voice was clear, louder than he'd ever heard it. I remember everything. She didn't beg, didn't fight. Just opened the pouch she'd sewn and held it out. Take it, she said. It's what you came for, isn't it? The man looked confused, then wary. He reached out slowly, took the pouch, opened it. Inside, nothing but ash and stitched linen. He looked up, and she punched him. Hard, years of fury behind it. He staggered. Elias took care of the rest. The men didn't return. The law never came. In these woods, no one came unless they meant to. And now, they didn't. That night, she burned the pouch, by choice, tossed it into the hearth and watched it vanish. Not in sorrow, not to forget, but because there was nothing left to steal. She had said her baby's name aloud, and no one could take that from her again. She sat beside Elias, closer than before. The fire burned low, slow, bright. It had waited for her. Now she would keep it. The men were gone. Their prints melted in the thaw. The axe never left the wall again, but she still woke at night, sometimes. No screams, no panic, just breath caught in her chest, hands clutched tight, listening. And beside her, always, the fire. And him. Elias never asked her what she dreamed. He just laid another log on the coals when they burned low. Not to warm her, to remind her. She wasn't in the snow anymore. She didn't speak much in those first weeks. Didn't need to. She cleaned the floorboards, sharpened the kitchen knives, sorted through sacks of dried apples, old onions, bitter salt. She took care of the place like it had always been hers. And Elias, he carved. Figures mostly. Birds, a fox, a woman curled around a bundle. When he showed it to her, she didn't ask who it was. She took it from his hands and set it above the mantel. One day she asked him his mother's name. He told her, Annie. She nodded. She must have loved the way you listen. He didn't answer right away. Then, she used to say words were cheap, but ears cost something. That made her smile. A small one, but real. The fire never went out after that. Not once. Even when spring came and snow melted off the roof in thick chunks and frogs called from the pond below the hill. Even when the heat made them open the windows at night. Even then, the fire burned. Low, steady, clean. In late May, they dug a garden. She chose the spot. Said it faced east toward where Josie had been born. And buried. She didn't cry when she said it. Didn't stammer or pause. Just said it like truth. And Elias nodded, as if truth was reason enough to plant green beans and onions and turnips. When she bled again, she didn't say anything for 3 days. Just watched him, studied his face, waited. Then she told him. He looked up from his carving, his hand stilling on the wood. Not fear, not worry, just stillness. You sure? He asked. She nodded. 3 days. He didn't tell her what to do, didn't ask if she was ready, didn't press his palm against her stomach like a promise. He just nodded once and said, "We'll build a second crib." They did. Together. He cut the boards. She stitched the blanket. No one came up the mountain. No bells rang in the trees. Just the sound of a woman laughing, soft and hoarse, like someone remembering how. One night, as summer leaned close, she took his hand. Not in fear, not in need, but because she wanted to. She curled it in her lap against the blanket he'd carved for the fire's first winter. I still hear her sometimes, she said, in the quiet, when the wind catches the chimney just right. He looked over. You think it's her? I think it's me, she said, still learning how to speak. He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because he pulled a fresh log from the stack, laid it in the hearth, and fanned the coals. Not for warmth, not for light, but because the fire was still hers, still burning. It had never gone out. Not when they left her in the snow, not when she lost everything, not when the men came with hunger in their eyes, not even when she bled again and the past whispered in her bones. It never would, because now someone else knew how to keep it.